Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Strutt, the head of Insights and Client Performance of Retail Doctor Group, where we work with retailers and leadership teams to transform their businesses, utilizing insights, strategy, performance, and customer-led growth. And joining me is Brian Walker, founder and CEO of Retail Doctor Group, who spent decades advising retailers, brands, and boards on growth, customer strategy, retail transformation, and the future of the sector. So welcome, Brian.
Hi, Josh. Good to be with you and great to be talking about one of my favorite subjects. So thank you.
Awesome. And so today's conversation is all about why we buy. And for those playing along at home, this why we buy is based off research that we've recently completed. So as a thank you for attending this webinar, we'll send you out an advanced copy over the next day with the fuller white paper being released on Monday. But the conversation is about why we buy, but more specifically, why understanding customer choice has become a leadership issue, not just a marketing or an insights issue. So retailers have more behavioral data than ever. We can see what customers search, click, compare, abandon, buy, repeat. But the uncomfortable question is whether all of that data is actually helping us understand the real reason why customers choose, or whether it's simply helping us observe behavior after the decision has already been made. And that's something that distinctly matters commercially. So when a customer does not buy, the answer is not always price, it might be doubt. When a customer compares, it's not always deal seeking, it might be about risk reduction. And when a customer walks away, the issue might not be demand, it might be failure to create enough emotional permission to choose. So this morning, Brian and I will use this why we buy research as the evidence base to also explain our limbic methodology further, as well as uncovering 3 core factors for the day. First, why customer behavior alone is no longer enough. Second, what the sample of research tells us about the emotional conditions that influence purchase. And third, how retailers can use RDG Limbic Insights as a commercial decision-making framework across brand, pricing, value, proof, service, loyalty, store experience, and the like. So Brian, if most retailers already know why customers are buying, why is the question of why they buy so commercially unresolved?
Well, I think the first step is to sort of know a little bit about, at a very simplistic level, and I'm not a neuroscientist, the construct of our brains. Essentially, sitting within our brain, in our cerebellum, as they call it, in the frontal lobe part of our brain, is in fact the limbic system. And the first thing to know about the limbic system is that it is the emotional processor of the brain. And a neuromarketing neuroscientist in particular would say to you that up to 90% plus of all behavior is determined by our personalities, processed through our limbic system. So that's the very first evidential piece. And we've worked with limbic now since about 2009. And why I was first attracted to it was because at the time, authors were coming out with books like Why We Buy, looking at the human condition that determines our consumption, our demand, the intrinsic feelings we know only too well when we meet someone. All that is driven by our emotional processor. And it's our view that we're unable to emotionalize the connection without understanding the core audience that we're communicating to via this limbic gateway. Now, what we've grown up with, of course, and is still very relevant, is demographics. And demographics, of course, is the what and the how. Brian walked into a retailer, purchased X amount of product over Y amount of time. And over time, we can build some pretty good predictability stats or probability stats. But what we can't answer is the why. And that's the commercial rationale of limbic. It's essentially understanding the why of our core audience. And one other comment, if I may, before we sort of move through this, it's that limbic is the subconscious pull. It's not about taking product and sticking it down the pipe and say, buy, buy, buy. It's the subconscious cues of appearance, sight, brand treatment, logo, all the way through. Let's explore that a little bit further, Josh.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Looking forward to it. So, kicking us off, the CEO dilemma. Customers are harder to read, not harder to reach. The slide says exactly that. But is the real CEO dilemma that retailers are investing in reach, media, and customer experience before they fully understand emotional relevance, Brian?
Well, I think again, traditionally, it has tended to be a one-size-fits-all to advertising, and we'll see how much of that sticks and how much of our sort of messaging sticks. The dilemma is to know within a finite budget what audience resonates emotionally with what we're about. And the only way we know that is the limbic methodology that I've touched on. Customers will increasingly be harder to read with more and more complexity of messaging, and I agree with you entirely. So we need to take different ways to reach what is essentially the heartland of why they want to buy from us, why they will tell others about us, and why they are part of our intrinsic tribe or otherwise. And so to your question, the commercial imperative is exactly that. There is more complexity. How do we cut through that complexity? And demographics in of itself won't deliver the why. And I think this is an important distinction. I can live in a certain street, as can anyone, and there'll be 3 or 4 people, or whoever there are, that are in my socioeconomic, my socio-demographic, let's say, hypothetically. A classic marketing demographic study would have us all buying the same way, motivated the same way, treat the brand the same way, and consume the same way. And that would be a misjudgment of how a consumer will operate. And it will misjudge to the point of overspending and wastage of marketing spend, for example. And it's a spray and pray approach, effectively. Right. It's not that that demographic structure isn't of value. It's the next level of cut through that matters.
That's right. And thank you, Brian. And just to go a little bit deeper on the marketing cut through, where else do those commercial gaps potentially show up as well? In terms of those commercial impacts that the spray and pray or the spray and pray approach might lead to?
Oh, well, it's a quantity over quality argument often, that we need to attract X number of people, consumers. But ultimately, marketing is a segmented approach. And if you think through that, when we talk about the seven characteristics or the types or 6 customer core segments of Limbic, we are really saying to a brand and marketing leader, look, you're going to have 1 or 2 customer segments, invariably, core segments, who really love what you do or potentially love what you do. And this is the emotional read on them. That's the profile. It's going to take a segmented approach to make that come alive. And our clients over the years that have worked with us realize this, that instead of saying, look, we've got a core group of audience, and we're going to put all our marketing into that. We say, no, at the end of this, you've got to have a segmented approach to this. And for example, you might have, and we'll talk on the types, you might have an ambitious achiever who really loves what you do in your brand and your offer. There's a whole status-driven play to their personality to enlist the behavior you want. You might have what we call the family follower. Well, that group, it's all going to be about safety and trust. So you've got to be able to segment, and you've got to be able to drill in to the emotional context of why they buy.
Right. And then in terms of linking back to the commercials of why we would want to pursue this in the first place. It's about how do we improve our conversion? How do we improve our basket size? How do we improve that penetration and relevance to the customers of our tribe?
Absolutely. And Josh, I agree. And I'd add to that loyalty won't come without an emotional connection. Loyalty around price, I would argue, is actually not loyalty. It's a transactional benefit that is attractive, but it's not entrenched systematic structural loyalty to a tribe member. And we use the tribe a lot in this space because everything that a tribe denotes, you know, the belonging, the utility value, the desire to tell others, you know, the Nike running tribe, the Harley-Davidson tribe, there's a pride in belonging. Well, that's an emotional connection. That's limbic.
That's limbic. Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Let's unpack that a little bit further. So, well, we've just talked a little bit on why do we want to understand consumer emotions, but ultimately, it's anchored by this concept that's the proven stat of 95% of consumer decisions are actually driven by our subconscious brain. And the foundations of our personality are built upon our emotions. And the thing that anchors to me as part of this and the relevance is that emotion drives decision-making 6-to-1 over logic.
Yeah, it does.
So the limbic methodology is just grounded in neuroscience and the motivational systems. But strategically, why does that matter more than other demographic or behavioral segmentations, Brian?
Well, of course, the adage is that we are rational, logical human beings capable of emotional thought, if you like, or feelings rather. Well, in reality, we are emotional beings capable of logical thought. So why it matters for a retailer or any business that engages with this is ultimately, I'm going to invest in some form of marketing. I want people to understand our brand. I want people to understand our offer, et cetera, and then buy into it and so forth. But of course, the commercial upside is that additional spend, advocacy, speaking to others about it, absolutely driving behavior around repeat purchase and so forth, and above all, loyalty, and not just transactional purchase loyalty, but longer term, more entrenched loyalty, can only come from an emotional connection. And there's the commercial benefits. And increasingly, as we value data, for example, CRM, customer data, and so forth, our ability to keep people engaged in this busy environment won't come from rational and logical segmentation, such as demographics.
That's right.
It will supplement it, but it won't come from it. And this is what we find in the study. Again, consistently for the, I don't know now, scared to say, 12 years or so of being involved with this methodology, consistently rings true. Now, this is below the radar stuff. I have to stress that. But you can't grow segmented, loyal customers without knowing the what, why, and how.
So, and limbic becomes less about labeling people and more about understanding what pulls them towards a choice or pushes them away.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, we all have this, don't we? You'll be somewhere and you'll meet someone and you'll think to yourself, really interesting person. I could learn more from this person. I enjoy their company. Or this person's interesting, but not quite my cup of tea in a social context. That's our limbic processor. Or the moment that someone buys something, shoes, jumper, whatever it might be, must have it, takes it home, and then looks inside the cupboard and goes, wow, I've already got a few like that. Wow, I've maxed out the credit card. What'll I tell the other half, or significant other? The first part is limbic, right? That's limbic. That's the emotional connection. The second part is what you and I, everyone would know as post-purchase dissonance.
Yep.
And that's the dampening down, the rational, the logic. Demographics lives in the rational and the logic, but limbic lives in the emotional drivers to behavior.
That's right. And A really interesting concept, Brian, but how much commercial waste is created when retailers confuse that demographic similarity with the motivational similarity?
Wow, it's a good question. Remember the old John Warnicki quote, I think it was, that 50% of
Yep.
my advertising spend is wasted. I just don't know which 50%.
Yep.
That's in a nutshell. So the commercial reality is if you're a business of, I don't know, let's just use a number, $10 million turnover for the sake of the discussion or higher, and you're spending an average of 3 to 5% in marketing, and some would say it needs to be even higher, but let's just use that for a moment. How good's your maths? That's $500,000 spent on advertising and marketing, theoretically. Now, unless you're deadly accurate with the laser-like treatment of it and understand the psychology and the innate behavioral drivers and motivators of your core audience, and by the way, many of them, as I've touched on, are subconscious, if you follow this methodology, you are guaranteed to be wasting at least half of it. Now, I know that's provocative, but that just rings true every time.
That's right. And so the demographics is telling you who is addressable, but not necessarily what is actionable and what's going to drive that return.
Well, that's right. I mean, and for example, yourself from the work that you're leading, if for example, we said we're going to open a business, a retail brand in London, UK, and we're going to, our target audiences are ladies between, hope I've got this age right, 35 to 45, high net worth disposable income, then we'd end up with Katy Perry and Kate Middleton, the future Queen of England, probably, in our core demographics. And we'd say, again, wow, that's our market sample. But it's not our market sample because we don't know what drives them, why they buy.
So let's start exploring some of the different types of personalities that we introduce as part of our limbic segmentation. And for all of those who are joining us online, you might see a little QR code in the top corner. And so what I'll just quickly do is make that a little bit bigger for you. And one thing that might be quite interesting is take your phone out, scan that via the QR code, and actually complete the limbic survey while you're on this webinar as well. So one of the things about the different types, and we see this range of personalities from the work that we do with Limbic, and we've got our data dynamos, our ambitious achievers, experience evangelists, our open dreamers, family followers, that's hidden slightly behind the QR code, and our logical loyalists. But we can also see the population mix and how spread out that is across the Australian consumer. But the key underlying factor is these emotional core values that are just highly different and segmented across these different cohorts and exactly what they mean. So, Brian, should CEOs think of limbic tribes less as customer personas and more as demand signals?
That's a clever way of saying it. Essentially, we see personas all the time. And for example, I might be a trade business and I'm going to create a persona called Bob the Builder. And I'm going to make all these assumptions based on probability about what Bob will do. But they're archetypes. Ultimately, we go out to understand through online surveys and so forth, to understand, and all the cues that I'll touch on, to understand who these particular personas are, but derived from population, not derived from, I don't know, manipulation of creating names and so forth. But yes, and I think it's important just to touch a little bit on how this sort of works. So we could have a brand, for example, that we find has this retail offer or franchise retail, whatever it might be, has an offer, for example, that has an inherent subconscious appeal to the ambitious achiever. So we know the marketing then to the ambitious achiever, the product selection, the in-store training, shop design, category approach, all the aspects of retail need to speak to status, exclusivity, limited range. They are people for very low relative attention to detail, So they need to know what's in it for me very quickly. And the messaging and the communication all the way down to customer layout and find of product online and in stores is to pitch directly to that audience. Now, that's not saying all other personality types, please don't enter the shop, far from it. But it is saying of that mythical 500,000 in advertising, for example, I'm going to dedicate X amount to that audience. They also, by the way, happen to be very good brand advocates and ambassadors.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, a logical loyalist, well, they want all the facts and figures and methodologies, and they want to understand the rationale, the logic for why they buy. So when we're messaging and marketing to these audiences, we're full of facts and figures. We're full of rationale. The ambitious achiever does not want to know. That just does not motivate them or turn them on. And then I touched on the family follower. That's security, warranty, trust. They're big on knowing, and social proof. So what they want to know is that it's got high Google ratings, their friends love it, it's secure to purchase, they're in a safe environment. And so you can see just in that example, 3 different core marketing messages, 3 different core experiences in the retail environment.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, in the shop design and the layout aspect, such as we've been doing work with a few clients, Clark Rubber comes to mind, the really great piece is that to the untrained eye, the shop will look as the shop always looks, but the limbic cues will be drawn to the limbic cues. And that goes right down to color. So for example, if we want to attract the family follower, we will, amongst all the messaging I've touched on, use subdued harmonic colors. Okay, if we want to attract the ambitious achiever, we'll use more black, slightly more red, deeper, more regal, more austere. To the loyalist, color cues will be much more around blue, which is a clinical, scientific type, analysis type color. To the uninitiated, it will look just like category management and different colors within the zones, but it will have a very, very different read to the limbic mind.
Yeah. And thanks, Brian. And so the strategic questions, it really is, it's not about us doing this work and describing these customers, but it's about really understanding what motivations as retailers should we invest behind. Because not all of these, and as you touched on, not all of these segments carry the equal commercial value for the retailers. So one brand might need to deepen loyalty with reassurance-led consumers. Another might need to acquire more progress-led. Another might need to defend margin with proof-led. And that's where the model becomes strategic.
Absolutely. And we haven't, what I enjoy about this particular conversation and what the study brings out is we haven't forced ourselves to being compelled to talk about price as a differentiator. Now, price as a differentiator, as a sweeping comment, will always come up in surveys as a driver for consumers. But when you get below it, what you see is that it has a different meaning to different limbic core segments. So if I'm running an optometry business, for example, and I've got a high-end range of frames, for example, I will take a marketing segmentation approach that's ambitious achiever. Now, they do typically tend to be the higher socioeconomic. That's true. So there we have our why, how, and what linking together.
When we have a look at the key findings together of why we buy. So across the generations, across different types of consumers, channels, categories, what we can understand is that the consumer needs vary. But the growth depends on actually understanding what emotional permission consumers and customers need before they buy. And this is clustered into several key elements. So we buy when the purchase feels meaningful or personally meaningful. We buy to make life easier. We buy to feel rewarded or improved. We buy when value feels emotionally worthwhile and when service makes us feel understood, when we trust the decision and when uncertainty is reduced. So, Brian, when we look at the findings together, the meaning, ease, reward, value, trust, service, all of these layers. Are we looking at buying behavior, or are we looking at the emotional conditions required for conversion?
The latter is the former. The emotional conditions, the limbic lens, if you like, creates the commercial opportunity. And so these are all what the research shows us, what your excellent research shows us, is why we buy. And your first point, we buy when the purchase feels personal or meaningful. Well, they're emotional connections, they're emotional context. We buy to make life feel easier. That's a reward. A reward is an emotional connection. Consumers rewarding themselves or others. We buy to feel rewarded. Emotional connection once again. We buy when value feels emotional. Self-explanatory. So you can start to see, without me going through, trust. The big currency is trust.
Yeah.
Trust is emotional. And we buy when uncertainty is reduced. That's true as well. Once again, emotional connection. Oh, by the way, I just felt like saying to you too, some of the scientific evidence around this for the ambitious achiever, they have slightly more testosterone in their system. And your family follower has more oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, in their system, right, in their hormonal balance. And so you can see how this all makes contextual and logical sense.
And so if a retailer wants to improve their conversion, it's not just about asking what stopped the customer, but it's about really understanding what emotional conditions are missing from my experience.
A retailer wants to sell more products to its core audience. It's got to speak to its core audience in a more direct way, in the way that we've talked about today. So, an example of this, of course, is that when we've worked with customers over the years, or clients over the years, we get a read on who those audience splits are, frankly, amongst those groups. And then everything tailors around that primary audience and that secondary audience. They're the two audiences we want to appeal to. And classically, we then start to build into all the channels that are relevant for that audience. We also have a bit of a look often at competitors and the limbic read on competitors. But of course, when we do the survey, what we're asking people who are being surveyed is their first response, their emotional response, because that is the big driver of behavior.
And once we bring all the pieces of the puzzle together, the conversion, the experience, and the commercials improve when the customer has enough emotional confidence to act. We play the game where they are. We're speaking to them where they spend their time, and we're unlocking that growth through that emotional permission.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because as we get more and more, I suppose, fused in our retail offerings, the growth of online marketplaces, the big category killers, and the actual delineation by product and differentiation by product will start to, and has already started to, get a bit grey. You or I can buy, and the audience can buy products from a range of retailers they couldn't have before, classically through online marketplaces. So we would say to you, and we have said for a while now, the rise of the brand matters more now. The customer experience, the relevance, the brand, and it's almost a hygiene factor that retailers carry the required product. We used to say product was king or queen. I'd say now experience is. Well, experience is at its foundational level an emotional experience, right down to the service levels I receive as a customer. I presume you're going to have the product. So that's a rational logic presumption. But how does it make me feel? And we keep coming back to these core intrinsic human desires and the human and again, processed through the limbic process that sits within our brains to determine why I will do business with you.
Absolutely. And anchoring that is the clarity on why that experience or why that product justifies a place in the person's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's have a little bit of a deeper dive into just a handful of some of our research pages or research papers as well. So one thing that we saw is, yes, cost pressure is rising. We all understand that over the last 6 to 12 months, as we've seen significant increases across utilities, weekly groceries. That's increased quite dramatically. But we've also seen some spending increases in the past 6 months, including aspects like travel and holidays, eating out, home improvements and DIY, fashion clothing. So we still have these portions of the markets that are continuing to spend and actually increase their spending within these categories. So in that tighter market, the category growth really does depend on knowing why customers still make room for you in their lives. And from a CEO perspective, it's how can your brand prove why your product still deserves that place within the household budget?
There is some socioeconomics around this sort of stats as well. 1/3 owned properties, 1/3 rent, and so forth. Well, over that actually. But again, the overt rational logic of some of these responses is showing up here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's plenty of research out there that says to us consumer confidence is fluctuating, declining at the moment, and so forth. And they are all largely derived of rational, logical responses. I feel the pressure of utilities. I'm going to watch what I spend. That's true. But it is uneven, and you're right to say that. There are segments that are spending more than ever. Now, we've only got to look at luxury retail. We've only got to look at the tourism spend. We've only got to look at areas where particular limbic types flock, they're advocates of, and they spend. Now, by the way, our personality is not derived by our socioeconomic status.
Mm-hmm.
We're born with that personality. Now, I'd mentioned before about the ambitious achiever with testosterone. Well, unless he or she takes supplements in later life, they'll always have that. They'll always view the world through that lens. They might end up in the nursing home and they'll have the most testosterone in the nursing home. And the family follower will always have the oxytocin and so forth. So what I'm getting at is that it's the level below this, and this
Mm-hmm.
slide shows us that whilst the logical says, yes, it's tough out there for some, definitely, there is a cut through, and that's
Yes.
the limbic cut through.
That's it. And isn't it interesting to see when we talk specifically about that ambitious achiever, the over-index in travel. So the general population, 21%, ambitious achievers, 37% are spending more on travel. They're spending more on eating out. So it's linking back to those core drivers of status, reward,
And
prestige.
it is. And yes, and they want new experiences and they want it to be about them in many respects. They're naturally good entertainers. They like an environment that has, that sort of environment to it. They want a retail offer to be relevant, fast to them, and reinforcing their value. I used to describe it as Qantas Chairman's Club, or Qantas, I'm not sure I'd describe it as Qantas Lounge anymore, but Qantas Chairman's Club is one analogy.
And another question to reflect on as a CEO becomes, what emotional need is actually sustaining demand in our category or within our consumers as well?
Oh, well, again, that's depends very much on the offer and the category, of course, but it equally, and if not more importantly, depends on what are the core intrinsic psychological drivers, cues, as expressed through the limbic aperture,
Mm-hmm.
that attracts that audience to want to stay with us and do business with us. And it's interesting, we're working with a fashion brand at the moment where we see a very, very high, relatively high level of limbic incision, if you like, around that whole family follower piece. And
Yes.
you can see it in their offer. You can see the way they take it to market. So their work is to continue to build on that. And they quarantine themselves from all the vagaries of a market that's turbulent because these people want to belong.
Absolutely. So let's move through our cost pressures and have a look at our next slide on consumers. Speaking on the role of value, consumers still want value, but it's friction that creates the resistance as part of the process. So yes, value for money leads in terms of what do we expect from retailers. Value for money leads, followed by rewards, availability, and product and faster delivery. But customers want the buying process to feel easier. So when retailers make customers work hard through unclear information or barriers that populate as part of that experience or part of that delivery, it creates resistance and creates that friction, not a complete barrier, but friction. So Brian, is friction one of the most underestimated forms of value leakage in retail?
It's increasingly so. And again, Josh, when we look at the limbic types in this particular study, we've got limbic types like the ambitious achiever, the open-minded, who absolutely value this frictionless environment extremely highly. And we know with the ambitious achiever, for example, they want it about then, they want it fast, and they want it frictionless. They don't. So one of the things we've looked at over the years is time. Time is a currency. And so we see the ability of retailers to minimize inefficiency of time as being critical to some of the limbic groups. Not critical to all, but critical to some. And what's also interesting here is this idea of value. Well, value is relevant to the limbic type. So whilst we might in this slide talk about this generic consumer or consumer, you know, everyone will tick yes to value. That's a given. But again, go below the lens of this. If friction is increasingly on the agenda because we've got more and more home deliveries and so forth, then we need to understand exactly what that expresses, how that expresses itself in the why we buy. So the open-minded, ambitious, for example, it matters. To the data dynamics, who's all about logic, rationale, process, oh, I get it, you'll be 3 days to get to me. That's less of a burden for them. And what's also interesting about some of the study work here is that we see consumers, again, via the various segments, wanting better loyalty, wanting better rewards. Yes. They want to be rewarded, okay? Now, points and discounts and all that great stuff is largely rational and logic-based. What are the intrinsic rewards this audience seeks? For the ambitious, it's more status. Yeah. For the open adventure-minded, it's about new ways of doing business that are interesting and new and innovative and fun with that consumer. Gamification comes to mind. The data dynamics, I just want to know the detail. So bring me in, create an app that shows me the process of the delivery process. I'm really interested in that stuff. I want to know how many drop-off points. I want to know exactly where it's coming from. And create loyalty to speak to that audience.
Yeah. So when the retailer really understands that tribe, we can understand what are the key friction points to remove as part of these processes, so that we're not asking our core audience to work harder to believe and understand the value. Yeah. So as a CEO, where is our retail experience actually creating that unnecessary effort for customers is really clear to know, really critical to know.
Yeah, and again, you know, it depends also on who that audience is within the segmentation model, how you pitch it. Because there'll be an acceptance of that resistance for some groups, as I've touched on, or segments, provided it's explained to them. For others, it'll all be about get it there faster than the opposition, for example, competitors.
That's right. And similar to the previous slide when we talked about the role of value, we see that absolute price is the highest impact on purchase decisions. And yes, in a general survey, that's a given. But it's about the proof that builds the confidence for the consumers. And it's the different elements of proof that's really critical to understand how we're appealing to our tribe. So they're not just asking about, consumers aren't just asking, are you the cheapest or is this the cheapest? It's saying, can I trust this decision? So the emotional role of proof is just that risk reduction, but it's also a conversion asset when used in the right manner.
Yeah, and I think ultimately what we're saying is emotion matters.
Yes.
Emotional connection is the moat around for a lot of retailers, all retailers, all businesses. It's the moat around, it's building the moat.
That's it. And so the proof is not just that conversion tactic as well, it's also the margin protection, because within the limbic segmentations, we also see some slight over indexes. For example, the experience evangelist, really empowered by the influencers and brand ambassadors. That's social proof.
That's right.
And
That's right.
and advocacy is driving that emotional relevance. But interestingly, we also see the contrast in the ambitious achiever is the lowest index on price. That matters less to them. It's more about how the status, the prestige, the demand, and the instantaneous need to have that product actually drives their decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's right.
And so what the key thing for CEOs to take away is the clarity and understanding what proof do your customers need before they feel confident enough to buy. And that's what Limbic helps them pact.
Yeah, well, we're calling it proof, but it's really what are the emotional cues within the way I take this brand to market that resonate with which segmented audience. And this is the limbic methodology of doing that to find out the why. So how do I drill into understanding the why? And, Simon Sinek made this famous by, understanding the why. Well, this is actually the same. This is understanding the why of consumer behavior. And that's why I've always been, obviously very involved with it, because I've seen the results firsthand.
And there've been some good results so far, and we look forward to taking some more clients and customers on the journey. And a slight transact from when we're looking at the role of cost, we see that as the absolute or the number one barrier. But the next barrier after that, and as we've touched on, is that emotional doubt. So it's the role of expensive. We're coming back to the role of how valuable the process is, or how valuable that is within not only what I'm seeing, but also my life. So too expensive leads, but the real barriers are where the conversion leaks, the inconvenience, quality concerns, range gaps, and ultimately how that's underpinned by trust. One of the key takeaways I get out of this one is actually the price is just the shorthand for unresolved doubt.
Oh, it's the default position for sure.
But
the unresolved doubt, which is a nice way of saying, or emotional doubt, is essentially intrinsically the individual has unresolved cues, or there's a misalignment of what this business is saying to me and how I feel.
Yes.
Okay. So this is we've used this example, ambitious achiever walking into a retail store that's got 1 million stock SKUs everywhere. It's not easy to read. It's not laid out in categories. Hasn't got any of the cues that appeal to the status-driven ambitious achiever. They're out of there. And we've surveyed this. We've taken shop layouts, designs, all sorts of things. And we've gone out and we do this, and we go out to the market and we assess. And every time we look at what an ambitious achiever wants in stores, they want less stock, more status, much more simplistic layout, straight to the product heart. And there's a reason why 𝗤𝗂𝗄𝗏, for example, comes to mind. And then when we go and look at a brand like Peter Alexander comes to mind, open-minded, followers love it.
Yes.
Right? And it's not overt. They can't quite explain why, but they love it. And that's limbic at work.
Absolutely. And so the strategic question that really does fall out of that as well is not just, is our price right, but is our value believed? And how does that resonate within our core audiences?
Well, price is a lever that is always played, of course.
Mm.
And again, you know, it's a lever that every retailer uses, and it's called discounting and all sorts of different things, okay? And of course, that's all necessary, but it becomes overused in the absence of understanding our core audiences.
Yeah.
And as you touched on, every single survey, since Adam was a boy, will say price is a barrier, you know, and that's a reality, because it's the first card in the pack that gets played.
Mm-hmm.
The point I wanted to make about this type of study, this type of work, is below the barrier, below the line stuff. Yeah. The understanding the psychology, the why.
That's right. And so, because what we can read from that is that the discounting just treats the symptoms, but it's about the limbic identifying the doubt to really solve and appeal
Yeah,
and emotionally resonate.
That's right. Absolutely. Pardon me. But every retailer who primes the market with discounting, you know, I've heard people say over the years, discounting is the correlation of excessive inventory over optimism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really totally fair, because there's planned discounting and markdowns for certain parts of the year. But again, it's very much around, if we don't have to discount so much, there's a natural ROI for this investment. If we grow more economic transactional value through these queues and so forth, there's the ROI. If we align our marketing spend to our core audience, we will, by definition, reduce wastage.
Mm-hmm.
These are the commercial outcomes.
Yeah.
And if we get that right, we will rely much less on margin pressure.
Right. And so the value of Limbic or Limbic Insights is not just the insight alone. It's actually changing the retail system around the customer. And one of the examples that we've worked with is Clark Rubber, and how we help shape their store of the future through the research. So, Brian, we've talked through some of the data on the value, the friction, the proof, confidence, risk, but from a practical perspective, because one of the questions for a CEO generally asks is, can this actually change what we do in the business? I find Clark Rubber as a useful example here. So what makes them a strong example of Limbic moving from a customer understanding into business execution?
Oh, you start with a board and an executive that is curious and wants to know why. That's always the opening position.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's okay. I get the what and the how. We've got all that, but why?
Yes.
And then it's about, we've used chart time comes to mind as well, where for over 10 years we've continued historically to do this work. So they're looking for growth in patronage, advocacy, economic results. And they also want to build a marketing and brand promotional calendar that is segmented. And then I think one of the other pieces here is thinking about, how well resourced as an organization am I to implement the roadmap that a company like Retail Doctor Group provides? What's my capability? And all these things were considered. And also, how do I bring this to testing? Well, that's invariably the store environment, the online environment, and the social media environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot to do with the messaging and the cues in the messaging and cues in the environment. And then it's about measurement and driving out those pilots. So there's a sequence of events.
Mm-hmm.
So what the data does and what the insights provides is the blueprint. Then the next level of expertise is around the implementation of it. right down to what media am I using the right media? So not, if I move on from Clark Robert for a moment, other clients as well will look at their marketing spend and go, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't realize that we had such a high subset in this survey of experienced evangelists. Okay. Now, what are we going to do about experience in store? What are we going to do about the experiential cues in our advertising? All the way down and all the way through to, oh, wow, these people love, again, just as a quick example, gamification. You know what? Why don't we create a loyalty program based on gamification for that audience, for that segment?
That's right. And so it just doesn't become a above the line marketing tool. It's how how it cascades through the entire business, through the entire operation to deliver that holistic experience to those customers. And what we see is exactly that, is Limbic is just not just the marketing tool. It's that retail operating system.
Yes.
And so
Absolutely.
just wanting to step back from the case study and talk about how retailers should use more broadly, which Brian, you've touched on, because the risk is that people hear Limbic and think only of segmentation or marketing. But what we're really talking about is a way of making better decisions across the entire business that is anchored to the real reason why customers choose you.
And you've used the real reason why customers choose you, the real reason why, and that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And then it's how do I deploy those insights to increase sustainability of offer, differentiation of offer, and greater consistency and economic return in deployment.
That's right, Brian. And the key thing there is that execution of those recommendations. And what do I do with the information? Because yes, it's great having profiles and that can feel great to understand, oh, this is who we're going after. But how do we tactically understand where do we invest? Which customer tribes matter most? What emotional territory? What value is being believed? How is that cascading through our stores, our layouts, our customer service, and the way that our team actually interact? All of these pieces come together to develop this understanding about where do we invest? Where do we invest our time? Where do we invest our funds?
That's right. And I want to go back quickly to that other point we started with. This is not a product push strategy.
Yes.
Okay. This is a consumer pull demand. We create all the cues in the business to align to the core audience that loves them or has the potential to love them over time. And what also happens is that for a lot of clients over the years, or retailers generally, they will, to their credit, get research and insight work. They'll spike up with activity, and then it'll sort of, everything else will take over. Tracking this over every second year, third year is important to do as well, because you also want to monitor the movement of those audiences. And another thing that retailers use this for is new product testing.
Yes.
For example. And is there alignment here, or new store design, or new offer, new online website design, whatever it is, they want to keep aligned to that core audience.
That's it. And so when we look at touching on a little bit further about how we can turn that emotional insight into that retail action, it's, the insight really earns its place when it changes the decision, behavior, or investment priority. And so how we actually go about approaching this is we identify customer tribes. We clarify what emotional territory are we playing in, and how do we maximize that opportunity for our clients. But then how do we activate that across retail? How does that cascade through everything that we do? And ultimately, how do we measure how can we continue to measure that emotional performance and turn it into growth?
Yes, that's right. One other quick example, Josh, comes to mind. One client, for many years standing working with us, saw that their audience, their core limbic segment, was the experienced evangelist. And one of the things that this group love, is constant freshness, change, being slightly provocative, edgy, hedonistic, really, ultimately. So moving their marketing play from here's your once a week campaign, whatever it might be, to bringing in that messaging and being more fun and more provocative, and their numbers grew by double digits.
Yes.
Same resource cost, same base, all the rest, but tuned. And then deployed in a way, and the brief to the agency was exactly, these are the elements of our core audience.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's speak to them.
That's it. And how that cascades just from the marketing to the wider brand, how they're seeing price and value, marketing and media, the store designs, everything that we've talked about. And right down to also understanding an optimized category mix as well, which shouldn't be undervalued as part of this consideration.
Absolutely.
That's almost bringing us right to an end as well, Brian.
I think it is. I think it is, Josh.
So,
but
as part of the key takeaways from today, you know, as a retail leader, the 3 questions or commercial considerations that we must be able to answer is, well, which limbic tribes dominate my customer base? What emotional role does our brands need to own? But ultimately, where is revenue being left on the table? And further that, margin as well.
That's right. And how do we get economic return for this?
Right.
Thank you very much, Josh.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's been great. And for all those listening along in the background, if you've got any other questions, feel free to reach out. And we'll also be sending you across our broader insights paper over the next day or so. But Brian, thank you very much for spending the time with me. It's been it's been a lovely hour to do that. And I think that we've got I think it's been a great opportunity to not only discuss some of the core findings from this white paper, but help retailers understand just what commercial impact Limbic can influence in your business.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for those who came on board for today's session. I look forward to sharing the white paper with you and the study. And Josh, once again, thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.